I'm Roger Wood speaking with Kathy Beebe of havennh.org. Not you, but the organization's been around for quite a while, right? Almost 5 decades.
Yeah, so this year is actually our 45th anniversary of providing services, but Haven is actually a merged organization of two agencies that began 45 years ago. So it was 9 years ago in 2015 that we merged into Haven, because for a really long time there were two agencies. One was focused on providing support and assistance to domestic violence, which was a safe place. And then there was one dedicated to working with sexual assault survivors, which was Sexual Assault Support Services, or SAS. And for a long time, the agencies worked really closely together. But what we found was that there were a lot of people that needed both agencies' services. So if they found one and we provided support and they needed shelter, they were still kind of being shuffled around. So we merged with the goal of doing more and getting bigger and being able to expand our programs and services to be able to better meet the needs of the community.
Men, women, children, anybody anybody might need the services of Haven. Uh, but I'm thinking off the top of my head of domestic issues like domestic violence and such. Um, Let me ask you this, narrow in on this. Before COVID, or I should say during COVID, were there increased instances of family violence or family issues? And what about afterwards?
Yeah, so one of the things that the pandemic did was show exactly how prevalent domestic violence and sexual violence is. And
Hmm.
what was interesting was initially during the stay-at-home time, we weren't hearing from a lot of people because of the fact that people were home and isolated with their abusers in many cases. So in many cases where before either they went to work or the abuser went to work, or there was some sort of respite and opportunity to seek out help and support,
Hmm.
they weren't able to do that. And because the person was often right there. Like, we actually got
Hmm.
some chats on our chat feature that we put on our website from folks that was their only way of reaching out, because they had to look like they were working on their computer. And so what we did hear from people, though, is their abuse that was already occurring escalated during that time of isolation. So the folks that we were hearing from were the ones that needed shelter or to leave the situation because it had escalated. Um, what happened then was we had a really small shelter that we were using for many, many years, which was basically a 4-bedroom house. We knew it was too small before COVID. And then when COVID hit, it was even smaller. So we unfortunately had no alternative but to put some of these folks up into a hotel. And what we realized was that a hotel is not shelter. It's further isolating. Our shelter is more than just a roof over someone's head. It's an opportunity to have that space to go, but also to focus on healing, connecting with others who have experienced similar things, programming, support, all of the pieces. So we knew even before COVID, we wanted to move forward with a new design and a new shelter, and COVID showed us that we needed to do that.
Hmm.
But after that stay-at-home phase during the pandemic, we heard a lot from people once things kind of opened up a little bit. And in particular, also for kids who were in unsafe and abusive homes where, suddenly when they were going back to school and they weren't staying at home, they had adults seeing them and hearing about what they may have experienced. So the reports of child abuse went way up at that point in time. And, one of the things that we do is support families whose children are being interviewed because they've disclosed abuse at a local child advocacy center. And those
Hmm.
numbers were significantly raised after the kind of stay-at-home piece.
Hmm. Curious. Um, you think about, or I think about generally abuse occurring to women um, by controlling husbands or partners or significant others. What about the other direction? I've heard of some stories about men being abused.
Yeah. So as you said a little while ago, we do work with anyone who's been affected by domestic or sexual violence, and that is men, that's women, that's non-binary. It's any individual that needs our help and our assistance. what's interesting is there's a lot of adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse that we work with. And when you think about kids being victimized, it's almost equal to being boys or girls that are victimized. When it comes to domestic violence relationships, there are situations in heterosexual relationships where there could be a female abuser. Same with homosexual situations. And one of the things that I think people focus on a lot in domestic violence relationships is the physical violence, which the physical violence is kind of the final escalation of a series of power and control and abusive tactics that are being used by the abuser. So a lot of what we see are that controlling financial abuse, where someone may not be allowed to work or turn over their paycheck, and all sorts of barriers that are keeping them in an unhealthy relationship, that sometimes doesn't even reach the point of that physical abuse. But
Has the development of the internet and your very informative website, havennh.org, has it helped in the battle against domestic abuse? Having that having that website?
well, I mean, I think, the pandemic was challenging for all of us, but the one positive thing is that people had to recognize that this is something that happens to a lot of people, that
Mm.
it's very prevalent, that it happens here in New Hampshire. Over the years, as we've continued to get bigger as Haven, we've constantly seen our numbers going up, but that's not necessarily because more situations are happening as much as it is more people realizing that there's help and support available that may not have existed before, or they may not have been aware of. So I think any opportunity to further our reach so that people know that there is help and support available. I think the other piece that's really critical is the prevention education work we do with kids in the schools. So we see about 15,000 kids in kindergarten through 12th grade that are having these conversations at a very young, in an appropriate manner, but having the opportunity to talk about personal body safety if it's a child, talking about healthy relationships and power and control in relationships, all with the premise of there is also help available and support if somebody is experiencing something. And those were things that didn't happen years ago. When I was in school, we didn't have these conversations. We didn't have access to this information. So if things were happening, nobody knew where to go. And so maybe they didn't go anywhere. So social media has helped that. Having websites with lots of information at someone's fingertips is definitely helpful in terms of raising awareness and helping people to access support.
Heck, Kathy, when I was in school, we never heard of domestic violence. And I'm
Exactly.
talking about through college.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when I was in college, I did an internship at a rape crisis center, and I'm from New Hampshire, and I came back to Portsmouth to say, where's the closest one? I bet it's Concord. I bet it's, something like that, only to find out that there was one right down the street. But because I had been in school and we didn't have these programs or information, I didn't know that.
Can you estimate how many people you serve a year, help a year?
Yeah, so in our client services program, and client services would be our 24-hour support line that we have, our crisis line, that could be providing support with people getting protective orders in court. That could be people in support groups. It's also the folks that are staying in our shelter. It could be people that are part of our housing program. We're fortunate that we have a federal grant that allows us to help people who don't need shelter but still need a house and a home, or apartment, to find housing. We are able to put them into housing, subsidize their rent on a step down basis for up to 24 months to give them the ability for that to become their permanent housing while we
Mm.
provide support in helping them reach that self-sufficiency. So client services is all of those pieces together. And roughly we serve about 3,500 to 4,000 folks a year in that program. And then, as I said, with our prevention education program, we serve about 15,000 kids that are participating in our school-based programs, which
Mm.
is great and important. But what we know, because we cover such a large area of all of Stratford County and most of Rockingham County. We know that that's only kind of the tip of the iceberg, and that as we continue to raise awareness and let people know about help and support, that the need is greater than that, and that there's probably more people that would be and will be accessing services. With our school program, we know that in our geographic area, there's roughly 40,000 school age kids. So there's still a lot of work to do to continue to try to meet the need that we know is out there.
Mm. Um, I want to get into some of your future plans, which I know include a move of your headquarters, which is very exciting sounding. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit more about your programs. For instance, on the crisis area line, by the way, I'm going to mention your safe line
Yes,
in our script.
great.
You can mention it now if you want.
Yes, so people can reach us through our 24-hour hotline, which is 1-603-994-SAFE, which is 994-7233. They can
From what
also go to havennh.org, and that has access to the phone number and the chat line. Right now, chat's only available during the day. We do hope to expand that beyond daytime hours in the future.
It's funny that not funny at all. How scary it is, for instance, for an abused woman, whether it's physical or mental, to escape.
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes people don't really understand that, particularly if they hear about physical violence, people can't understand. And you often hear people wondering why someone might stay. And we're always encouraging people to kind of look at it from what are the barriers that exist out there that make it really difficult for someone to leave. Someone is not staying because they want to be in a situation where they're being harmed or are unsafe. They're staying in a situation because perhaps, as I mentioned, maybe there's been the financial control. Maybe things have been in their name and not paid, and there's credit that needs to be repaired. Or maybe they weren't allowed to work and there's work skill building that needs to happen. Or maybe they do have a job, but they turned over that paycheck, so they don't have any resources. So the question is, how do I, and if there's children involved, how do I make sure if I leave, I can make sure that myself and my children are going to be okay, and that we can do that, which is what makes things like our housing program and our shelter so critical for folks to be able to have access not only to support around the trauma that they've experienced, but the tools that are needed to truly be able to reach that point of safety and self-sufficiency.
Yeah, I wonder philosophically how it is you can find out in advance that a person is going to be dangerous.
It's interesting because I think sometimes people don't realize that abusive relationships start out just like most relationships do, where things are good. They're really good. And so you're in that kind of what I always call the permagrin phase, that people have when they're first in a relationship. And you hear from people that are in abusive relationships that when they first were together with their partner at that time, things were almost too good to be true,
Mm,
and that
mm,
it's subtle in terms of how those controlling behaviors start and how that isolation starts to then get somebody away from perhaps their support system and start to do. So it's not like somebody goes into a relationship where they're being treated poorly from day one and um, stay in it. It's by the time things escalate to the point of being difficult for the survivor, at that point in time, a lot of those barriers already exist. Perhaps
mm.
they've married, they've had children, there's all sorts of things. They move to a different community where there's not family or friends nearby, all sorts of things that make it difficult.
Yeah, have you pointed out um, how people are watched, monitored by the abusive partner, and how difficult it really is to get away from that, from the smothering that you get from the abusive partner.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because it really can be so subtle. Like in the beginning, it could be the survivor trying to make plans with a friend and the abuser being like, oh, but that's our only time to spend together, and continuing to keep people away from their friends. And then slowly it might be, well, there's something about that particular friend. So, I mean, it can vary in terms of how it ends up playing out, but um, I think it's just important for people to know that abusive relationships don't start out that way, and that there are very real barriers that are keeping people in that. And in many cases, people are trying to leave, but those barriers are making it impossible, and or
Mm.
they get pulled back in again, not because of the abusive relationship, but because of the fact that they can't make it on their own because of some of those barriers.
Kathy, your geographical focus, as I understand it, is the Seacoast region in general, Rockingham and Strafford counties. Is there, in your opinion, how people can get away from these counties, the very busy counties, but others around the state?
So Haven is one of 12 organizations in New Hampshire that are part of the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. So in every geographic part of the state, there is an organization like Haven. Um, there's no rhyme or reason to the way that we're structured or the geographic areas we cover, because we all were kind of those small grassroots organizations that sprouted up in the 70s. So it's one of the reasons why Haven's area is so large, and there
Mm.
might be some smaller ones in different parts of the state. But um, if people go to the coalition's website, which is nhcadsv, kind of hard, .org, there's a map that shows where everybody's crisis center is located. People also, we all always work very closely together. So if someone reached out to us and they weren't in our area, we could provide that initial support and link them up to services in their community if that was needed.
One of the reasons we're speaking today, and it's of course great to hear from you and also the services of Haven, is that you are ultimately planning a move of the headquarters to a pretty exciting new development on Route 1 that's not maybe next week, but eventually to an area of the St. James Church on Route 1, geographically
Um,
across from McDonald's.
yeah, so it's not St. James Church. That was the one that was down the road. This is the church that's the Christ Church that's part of the Episcopal Diocese. But it is across from McDonald's on Route 1 in Portsmouth. Um, we are really excited about this project. One of the things I was saying before was about the shelter that we used to have for many years that was a small 4-bedroom ranch. So imagine leaving and perhaps having your children with you and going into this tiny house where you were given a bedroom and you perhaps shared a bathroom with another family, and all sorts of challenges that we know just come from living with roommates or significant others in general. And when you throw different people with different situations into that mix, it's really hard. We
Mm.
also knew that the hotel model was not working. So before COVID happened, we actually went out to the West Coast and looked at some models for shelter, because they've done some pretty innovative things, and they use the premise of building with dignity. And so they've designed their shelters in a way that they are more like transitional living. So people have their own space. They have kind of like their own apartment where they have that place to retreat to, but it is also part of a shelter in that there's access to programming and support and help and connecting with other folks that are staying there. And we knew back then that that's what we wanted to do, and that we would eventually move forward with a capital campaign to be able to create that space and co-locate it with our program and office space, because again, having access to more of the services and programs right now, when we had our tiny shelter, we could bring people in to do programming, but they were only doing it for the folks staying in the shelter. If we have the space to provide programming for any of the people reaching out for help and support, whether they're staying in shelter or not, it allows us to provide that to more people.
Hmm.
So we knew we wanted to do that, but we also knew that when you co-locate like that, you're ideally looking at a place that has some access to transportation. So for us, that meant in our area, Portsmouth or Rochester. Right now, we have space in Rochester. We're part of the community center there, and we have great space in terms of being able to provide programming and support. Portsmouth, since we merged, we've been located on the Pease Trade Port, which has been great in terms of access, but awfully expensive to be able to be here, providing support and assistance. So
Sure.
our goal was to ideally find something in Portsmouth where we could build this model of a program that we knew would best benefit the community. So we went through all of the pieces of feasibility, trying to figure out what it was going to cost us, all the things, started to pull together our campaign cabinet to work on this, and the world shut down in 2020.
Yeah.
So during the entire time of COVID, we have been looking for space in Portsmouth because space in Portsmouth is hard to come by. And so we continue to look at any opportunity for purchasing space or what might be available. And we actually last year were awarded $2 million in congressionally directed spending through Senator Shaheen's office to go towards this project, still with no location to do it. So when things started to, when it became known that there was an opportunity that the Episcopal Diocese was looking to how to repurpose their space in a way that would best meet the needs of some of the needs of the community, and they approached Portsmouth Housing Authority, they also were looking at what else might make sense to be here. And so Portsmouth Housing knew we were also looking for space and brought us up as an option as well. So what we have now is a tremendous collaboration where there will be the relocation of our headquarters from Portsmouth at Pease over to renovating the church building that exists there. We will be sharing that church building space with Little Blessings Child Care Center that already exists there.
Right.
We'll be building off the back 7 units of our transitional housing. And then Portsmouth Housing Authority will be doing 44 units of workforce housing. And then there'll also be, where there's a rectory on the site, a new worship space for the congregation that still connects there. So it's an amazing opportunity. It's addressing some of the critical needs in the community. We're very grateful for the Episcopal Diocese for recognizing that they had the opportunity to do this for the community. So we're really excited about it, and it's going to allow us to do what we know makes the most sense in the work we're doing with survivors of domestic violence and their families.
As as I read, I think the senator Jean Shaheen's been very aggressively involved with this.
Yes, Senator Shaheen has been amazingly supportive of the work to address domestic and sexual violence in general, whether it be through the support through this congressionally directed spending. She also has had an active role in the Office of Violence Against Women federal funding opportunities to do this work, which is the program that does fund our housing work that allows us to subsidize that rent for the folks. It's almost impossible for someone to leave an abusive relationship right now with the housing crisis and be able to even if you find a location to live, to be able to sustain that and support that when you're just coming off the heels of this relationship is impossible. And so that program is so critical. Whereas without that program, we might be doing the one-offs of a security deposit help, which helps, but that's not housing work. That's not really getting people to be in what will become their permanent housing.
Obviously, we'll be following your work and the PHA work dovetailing together to create this new property and this new concept. Did you have anything more to add about this at the moment, Kathy?
I don't think so. I mean, I think at Haven, we're just really excited because, as I said, as we continue to grow as an organization, we see the need that's out there. We see the challenges that people in abusive relationships are facing, 2 of which are access to childcare and access to housing. So I think that's what makes this collaborative project so exciting to me, is that it's more than just like all of those pieces working together are so necessary to truly provide those comprehensive support services to help people live lives that are safe and free from abuse.
Kathy Beebe, Executive Director of HavenNH.org.
I'm Roger Wood.